Today is Tuesday, September the 23rd, 2008. I am at the New York State Military Museum in Saratoga Springs, New York, and we are doing a telephone interview with Charles Bertram. Mr. Bertram, for the record, would you please state your full name and your date and place of birth, please?
Sure. Charles H. Bertram, B-E-R-T-R-A-M, born June 15, 1936, East St. Louis, Illinois.
Okay, sir. And did you attend school there?
Yes, I attended several schools moving around, and then East St. Louis High School until my senior year, and then I escaped from East St. Louis and attended senior year at Edwardsville, Illinois, a small community nearby.
Okay. And what year did you graduate?
1956.
Okay. And you entered service that same year?
First, I was for a year and a half in the National Guard, high school, the 880th Aviation Engineers out of Jefferson Barracks, Missouri.
Okay.
And then I joined in August 31st, 1956, the U.S. Air Force.
Okay. And what made you pick the Air Force?
I guess I had always thought of it. I had several uncles that were in World War II, and a brother in the Marines in Korea, and the Air Force seemed like a better. In fact, I was to join the Air Force to be a draftsman, but it didn't work out.
Okay. And whereabouts did you go for your basic training?
Lackland Air Force Base in Texas for the Phase 1, 30-day basics, and then I finished my basic training while attending radar school at Lowry Air Force Base in Denver, Colorado.
Okay. Was that your first time away from home?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay. And what was basic training like back then? Was it a lot of drill and ceremony and rifle?
I want to tell you the truth. It was a joke.
Oh, okay.
The games and the crowds I played with in East St. Louis were tougher than my Air Force basic training. This is when the Air Force was in a transition kind of period. And actually, during that first basic training, we could actually get out of an hour of PE by paying 75 cents and going roller skating. And they closed that down when they had a big expose on that a couple of years later. But it wasn't very difficult. Can I go on?
Oh, sure.
All right. My good fortune was to have the worst K.I.A. in the history of the Air Force. We had 3 training instructors for our 70-man flight. Mm-hmm. And the top 2 in rank were the instructors, and they were good guys, and they knew what they were doing. And then we had an Airman, for Airman first class, I won't say his name, who was worthless, and he was in charge of teaching us drill and getting us from point A to point B for our lessons. And he was always messing up. And he inadvertently did me a great service, because all of us could read, and we knew from the bulletin board alongside our barracks that the next day we were to have a big battery of tests to decide what career fields we would be eligible for. And so our head TI at the middle of the day told us to get a good night's sleep, try very hard to do our best scores on that test, because the guys with the low scores would get into the lower OJ tree, on-the-job training, and the higher scores would get into the good technical schools. Mm-hmm. So then our low-ranking TI, he decided to keep us up till 3:30 in the morning scrubbing the barracks over petty reasons. Then he dropped us off at the testing center a whole hour early so he could take off. And we spent an hour standing around in the Texas sun before going into the Quonset hut for the test. And now I was in good shape because I had run cross-country and track and worked on construction as a carpenter. And so what happened was I stayed awake during the test and maybe scored higher than guys that were smarter and better educated than me. Mm-hmm. And I had signed up to be a draftsman, and I had studied drafting and mechanical drawing and in high school. So when the smoke settled and I met with the lieutenant to get assigned, he said, well, you were scheduled to go into draft, and I have an opening in drafting school, and you blew the top off that test, or something like that. However, you also scored high on all these other tests, so I'm putting you in electronics. And he assigned me to Lowry Air Force Base in Denver for radar fire control system on the F-102 Interceptor, one of the longest, most difficult electronic schools they had. And so I had to struggle to keep up with the other guys. But it was a good thing because I fell in with a bunch of guys that were starting to take college courses part-time at the University of Denver, and I joined them and found out that I could do that. So it was all for the better.
Okay. Now, how long was that school you attended?
Okay, that's the funny part. The first one was 39 weeks.
Wow.
And we were well into it when they changed their mind on a bunch of us and changed some of us to a 52-week school and others back to the 39-week school after taking a couple weeks off while they sorted out problems with guys getting discharged and number of planes and such. And so I was still in the Air Training Command and after almost a year, and they came along and they asked for volunteers to stay. We were scheduled to work on the F-102 Interceptor, and they came along and they asked for volunteers to stay another 23 weeks for a school to work on the older F-89 Interceptor that had now a more modern radar set, MG-13. And nobody volunteered except one or two guys that were engaged to girls in Denver. And so a few days later, when we showed up for school, we didn't get our textbooks, which are classified and in a vault. And only the guys that were going to ship out in the next week or so got their books. So when we went to a room, we were told we were going to be taking a 200-test GE battery fundamental electronics test. And so I excused myself for the latrine and went to the office and asked one of the clerks. She said, the guys that score high on the GE test will stay for the 23-week school. So I went back and shared that information and then scored a nice, say, 60 or something. But one guy, the smartest guy in our class, happened to be from New Jersey, he missed all 200 questions. So they took him.
Oh, gee.
And then when they got done, they were 3 guys short. So Adams, Baker, and Bertram got to stay for 23 more weeks. And so I was almost 20 months in the Air Training Command. And then on a 2-week delay en route to go to Rome Air Force Base in the Adirondacks near Syracuse to go to the 606 Cameron, or Consolidated Aircraft Maintenance Squadron. There had been, when I was assigned there were 2 squadrons of F-89. And during that period, while I was in transition, they dissolved one squadron. A lot of the NCOs, the guys with experience, maneuvered to get themselves transferred to the squadron left behind. So when I got there, we were overstaffed, and I was needed like a hole in the head. And we would come to work. We troubleshooted and worked on the flight line on this electronic radar fire control system. You had 4 guys for enough work for each one guy. And so you'd come to work hoping you'd get the pre-flight a plane or find one broken to work on. And many times you just stood around. So that froze us in rank, but we were then eligible for TDY. And so in the spring, I talked my way into a job with Special Services. For the summer, the base Special Services ran a recreation camp in Alexander Bay, New York. And so I went up there to run the boathouse and repair outboard boat motors and drew $180 a month per diem. Was second in charge with a staff of 3 and did that during the summers for 2 years. And then during the winters, or most of the year, I'd be back at the Air Force Base on the flight line. And the next year we transitioned to the F-101 Voodoo, and they did away with our F-89s. But the F-89 was a good plane. It had a pilot and a radar operator, and was actually armed with nuclear air-to-air weapons. We were supposed to set off an atomic bomb in front of a fleet of Russian bombers. I'm glad we never had to do it. But it was great duty. And of course, I never got shot at. I never got to go outside of the country other than Mexico and Canada. But there were a lot of good adventures.
Okay. Are there any other adventures you care to talk about?
Oh, sure. Let's see. For example, when we were in the Air Training Command in Denver, you had a 6-hour school day. So many days, for 2 hours a day, they would try and find something for you to do. Might be paint a barracks or something. So you try to get a job. And so I got a job as squadron draftsman and drew fire evacuation plans from just about all the buildings on base and worked myself out of the job. And then the sergeant called me in and asked if I'd be on an honor guard detail. And he said, the honor guard carries rifles in parades and other things. I said, yeah, that sounds great. Well, one of the other things was the honor guard fired rifles at military funerals. And in a city the size of Denver, almost every Saturday, there would be a funeral. For the funerals every day we couldn't go to. And I don't think I ever marched in a parade. I showed, because they'd assigned 6 of us when there was a parade. And I was the shortest of the 6, so when I'd show up in the morning for the parade, they'd dismiss me and one other guy, and we'd have to run to the armory to return our rifles and run back in formation to march. But when there was a funeral, we would make our bed, set up our footlock for plane, and then get on a bus and go to fire our rifles at a military funeral. And we'd pick up a bugler on the way. So one time, the funeral was in a small cemetery not far from the base. And I thought it strange that the sergeant drove his own car instead of riding on the bus with us. Well, we got to that cemetery in no time, and it was a very short, quick funeral. And then the sergeant said, well, I'm going home. Bertram, you're in charge. Take the guys back to barracks, turn in the rifles. Well, we were going to get back right in the middle of inspection. So instead, I had the bus driver let us off a couple of blocks from the base, and I marched the guys onto a city bus, complete with rifles, and we went downtown Denver to the VFW club, where they agreed to let us hang out there for a couple hours. So we stacked all our rifles in a corner, compared our money to make sure we had bus fare back, and bought a pitcher or 2 of beer. But then World War II and Korean veteran businessmen began to come in, and they saw us in uniform, and they started buying us pitchers of beer for hearing their war stories. And about 3 in the afternoon, there I was marching 6 drunk guys with rifles through Denver. And so I got them nearly back to base, and I had us get off and hide in some trees while I walked back through the gate and got my car and came back and loaded the rifles in the trunk and took the guys back. That was an adventure. And
so you didn't get in any trouble for that?
I never got any trouble. One time we had a military funeral. Many times we would be the first ones at the gravesite, and sometimes the caretaker would show up, and then we'd wait for the funeral party. Well, many times some people didn't go to the service, went directly to the cemetery. So we'd be standing at approximate at ease near the gravesite with our rifles. The bugler, we would place him off to one side behind a tree. And if somebody came, we would clean up our language and straighten up a little until the funeral party got there. Well, we're standing around, and this car pulls up, and this driver gets out, and he goes to the trunk. And he picks up something, he turns around, and he opens the back door, and this lady in black gets out. And I look, and the guy's carrying a brass urn, and he's got a collar on. I said, Sergeant, I think this is our funeral. And sure enough, it was. So we lined up. Well, they had a whole grave with canvas straps for the casket, but no casket. So they sent one guy to the caretaker for a board, and we laid a board on the straps and put the urn on it. And then we did the whole funeral spiel and the firing of the rifles and the blowing of taps. And then we're turning around and walking back, and one of my guys, a crazy guy by the name of Kim, who was as bad as I am for opening his mouth at the wrong time, said in too loud a voice, gee, they could have just used a post hole digger.
Oh, jeez.
Sergeant didn't appreciate hearing that. And then another time, there was a very unfortunate thing where an officer had a flame out near the base, and he put his plane into a railroad embankment rather than in the housing unit. And we had a funeral right on the base with everybody there. And I was on the rifle squad firing the rifle, and because of the military, we were even closer. And at that time, we were using M1 Grand rifle and blank ammunition. And they didn't have the muzzle brakes they nowadays use on gas-operated weapons that allows it to recoil with a blank. So we would put up the rifle on command, fire on command, and then bring it down and throw back the bolt to feed another round in the chamber, and then on command put it back and fire. Well, they were used to jam, and in which case we just pretended to put the rifle up. And since we were pretty well synchronized, they didn't know whether they were getting 7, 6, or even 5 shots going off. But the guy next, at that particular funeral, the guy next to me, when he threw back the bolt up for the first shot, it hung back. So he sticks it up, brings it back and tries to tap it to get it to close, and it won't close. So he sticks it up again, he brings it back down. Then we go to the salute position with the rifles vertical in front of us, and they start blowing taps, and ka-ching, his bolt closes. It goes off like World War III. Then all these brass are turning around giving us a dirty look, and I'm like trying to hide behind my rifle. So in a loud voice, as soon as it was over, the sergeant was saying, "Now next time, put your thumb in it." Well, you don't really want to put your thumb in an M1 when it was close. So we worked out a drill that if it jammed like that, you held on to the little bar so that it couldn't close, and changed your grip. But anyway, it was interesting, and it was always a beautiful ceremony, and it got me out of certain details, so that went on. Then when I was in Denver, the amazing thing I found was, I'm sorry, what was your name again?
Wayne.
Wayne, I found a lot of guys would go into service, and during their time, they were familiar with maybe one or two trips to a museum, amusement park, and then the taverns nearest the base. And I went trout fishing, deer hunting, gold panning, took college courses. And in fact, in Denver, the community theater used to give the Air Force Base 2 tickets free for every play. You picked them up at the Special Services office at the base gym. And the only requirement was you go in uniform. So I had to get those tickets and then get a date and go see a nice play for free. And it might be somehow I learned about Special Services, and that we had equipment you could check out, deer rifle, beer coolers, sleeping bags, tents, snowshoes, skis, tennis rackets to use on your leisure. And the supplies had them. A lot of guys just never seem to be aware of that. And in fact, one time we were panning for gold in Cripple Creek, me and my buddies, wearing old clothes, and this tourist guy shows up with a station wagon, his wife, and a movie camera, and he wanted to film us getting gold. Well, I had found some fool's gold, or iron pyrite, big, beautiful, gold-looking crystals. So I said to the guy, "No, let me take movies of you." I'm a photographer. I'd had some photography training. "Let me take a movie of you. Your wife panning for gold." And I broke up some of the iron pyrite, put it in their pan, and had them swirling it in the water and picking it up, discovering this gold. And the guy, we hammed it up, had the guy jumping around doing a Walter Houston dance. He found gold. While I'm filming them, with their permission, my buddies are emptying their beer cooler. So there's a great trade of some of my fool's gold for half a case of beer, I think. And we had, anyway, when I shipped out from Denver to Rome, New York, to Griffiss, our squadron there was overstaffed, and after working in Special Services, they offered me a job during the winter in the NCO club as a part-time bartender, and they soon found that I knew some carpentry, so they created a job as NCO club officer club carpenter. And what they had was big old mansions that made into these clubs, and upstairs they had rooms full of basket chairs that had been pulled apart. The guys leaning back in them. I set up a shop, and I would glue chairs back together. So if I wasn't working in radar and I got the afternoon off, or in the evenings, I could go to the NCO club and go to the bar, and they'd give me a third of a pitcher of beer and a ham sandwich, and I'd go upstairs and I'd start gluing chairs back together. There was a time clock. I get $1.50 an hour, and until I ran out of room. Then I'd have to let them sit overnight, and then I could check out a truck at motor pool and move them from one building to another. And this is one of the things I got to do that was interesting. And of course, at the recreation camp, the base using non-appropriated funding from the NCO club and the officers club and the base theater, they maintained this recreation camp. And we had cabins, and we had a few house trailers. And the people from the base could come up on the weekend or when they were on vacation, on leave, and rent a cabin for $2. Now remember, this is in the early 50s. They could rent a cabin for $2 that came with 4 bunks, with bedding, a refrigerator, hot and cold water, a picnic table outside, a trash can, and stay for a few days. And then in the boathouse we had 30-something 14-foot aluminum Arkansas traveler boats with 6 7.5 horsepower Evan Root outboard motors. They rent it for $2 a day. Now at that time it cost us about $1.25 to fill the 6-gallon gas tank with gasoline. And guys would rent out the boats, and we fixed the motors and sent them on their way. And eventually I wrote several short stories and sold them to Air Force Times. Now, one of them was called A Mop to the General, and I actually handed a mop to the General, and he used it. I was supposed to mop out his boat. General told me the afternoon before he wanted to go out the next morning, so I said, I'll have a good new boat ready for him. And it rained that night, so I was up early, and my buddy and I bailing out all these boats, and then we had to mop them. Well, the General had never come down to fish early, so I put off mopping out his boat while I was trying to fix a fuel pump on another boat and motor to get it going. And the General came down, and so I dropped what I was doing and picked up a mop, started to do it. He said, no, here, I'll do the mopping. And so I handed him the mop. Well, he no sooner started mopping than his aide, a lieutenant, came down, saw what was going, came over and screamed at me, the General is over there using a mop. And I couldn't resist it. I said, well, I'm sure he'll figure out how to use it. And the lieutenant was ready to court-martial me, but he looked around and the General was laughing. The General went away. And then another time, I had my assistant changing spark plugs. And I guess he took the cover off the motor, took off the spark plugs, and then put the cover back on. And this officer showed up, a colonel, lieutenant colonel, and he wanted the boat just to roll in the inlet. He didn't want to check out a boat. The motor, he just wanted to roll one around the inlet. I said, yeah, there's good fishing right here. And so I told him to take that one. And, well, once he got out in the inlet, he decided he would go out in the St. Lawrence River, which is an international seaway. He decided to change his mind. He would use the motor and go out there. So he's out there trying to start a motor that doesn't have spark plugs.
Oh, gee.
So eventually somebody towed him back, and he was screaming at me, and I was thinking, well, the cheapskate tried to save $2.
Yeah.
Served him right. So when I wrote up the story on the General with a mop, I fudged a little, and they included that. So it ended up I was sending the General out in the river with a spark plug, with no motor with no spark. But it really wasn't a General; it was a Colonel. And then another story is when we were in Denver. Rock climbing, me and a couple of my buddies and a couple of girls, we were well above the timber line, resting because of high altitude, and I saw this 4-foot little pine tree growing out of a rock. And now this is a true story, and I said, that tree is not going to survive. And I had always been kind of a conservationist, so I said, I think I'm going to get it out of there and take it down to lower altitude and replant it. Well, the guys made sure it would happen by telling me that I couldn't do it. So I got some rocks and made a keystone-like wedge and hammered and got the tree out and all its roots. So I wrapped the roots in snow and wet moss and took it back. And then I didn't have any tools to dig with, so I said, well, I'll take it back and plant it near the base, near our barracks. No, you can't do that. Airmen just can't go and plant a tree near the barracks. I said, why not? So I did. But on one side of the barracks, we were always having formations, and on the other side, they were always throwing frisbees and footballs. But over by the orderly room, right near the major's window, was a 12-foot square plot of grass. So I took a butt end and a bed adapter, and I dug a hole, and I planted that tree. And everybody's saying, you can't do that. You're going to be in trouble. So each night I watered it. Each morning we marched past it going to class, and nothing happened. After about a week, at the end of the school day, the PA system said, Airman Bertram, report to the first sergeant as soon as possible. So the guy saying, now you've had it. So I go there, report in, and he says, Bertram, did you plant that tree out there? I said, yes, I did. He said, well, the major thinks you put it too close to the sidewalk. Have the base gardener move it over. He must know if that's okay with you. So I sent that story to the Air Force Times, and they sent me back a $100 check.
Oh, wow.
And the military was good for me, and when I got high school later on, I told lots of young boys, go to the service if you're not sure what you want to do, and then go to college. You'll do so much better. Sometimes they listen to me. But when I was in the radar section, we did troubleshooting on the plane radar spark control system. The RO, radar operator in the back seat, would come down and he'd tell us what was wrong, and we'd go out and try and fix it and debrief him and see what needed adjustment. And anyway, they were always modifying the planes. So I had a chance to get loaned out NADAR. That's the glorified tape recorder that we had that used 3/4-inch recording tape in a canister, and it recorded the picture from the radar scope, from the radar operator, the pilot scope, and I think 4 of the instruments, the artificial horizon, altitude, airspeed, and something else, maybe wind direction. And you could play it back on this big monitor inside, and they'd evaluate the missions. Well, it was a photo NADAR shop where they used to develop the film from the gun cameras, the 16mm little cameras they used mostly during World War II and were phasing out at that time. So they had a regular darkroom, and I began to hang around with those guys because I was working there during the day, soldering, changing resistors and capacitors to bring their equipment up to our latest modification. And it kind of got me started in photography doing that. And there was one unfortunate thing at that time. An F-102 in Maine shoot down another F-102 by accident. Oh. And they brought that tape to us, or a copy of it, and wanted copies made and to show other about the flight. So officers kept coming in and asking us to show them that tape. So I heard the actual story several times over, and it was a complete one mistake piled on another mistake. You had a certain number of planes that were loaded hot and armed. That was your alert commitment. And the other planes you just kind of kept ready in case of emergency, then you armed them. Well, they rotated those hot planes. Well, in Maine, apparently the ground power equipment that moved the missiles up and down, they had several breakdowns. And so they were falling behind on the time it takes to recycle, and they didn't want to have less than their 6 or 8 planes armed at one time. So they postponed downloading, and they took a couple of armed planes and set them out on the flight line while they uploaded new planes. Well, to make sure that didn't lead to a problem, they assigned an airman to stand there and guard those planes from their being used. Well, apparently, when the last of the 6 loaded planes was in the bay, they reported that to the operations. Well, operation reported it to EDAF, or Eastern Air Defense, and that's what they were waiting for to schedule an alert. And they scheduled a recall alert where we all ran and got all the planes flying up in the air. And so they got one of the 2 planes downloaded, but they still had one loaded on the runway. So they took the guy that was watching it, who was an experienced technician, because they could use him on something, and they put on a new guy who had just been there a few days and said, stand here and watch this plane, it's hot. Well, it turned out was a drag racer, and he thought hot meant this was a real fast plane. Uh-huh. And so some poor pilot who got there late saw that plane, checked, and it was listed as in commission, so he came and asked the kid, anything wrong with this plane? He said, no, that's a good one. So he got a ground part from a crew, and somehow they overlooked the red ribbons hanging from the missile that showed that it was lethal and not a dummy missile. And he flew off, and his radar picked up one of his buddy's airplanes, and the only voice on the whole thing was a voice saying, oh my God, I'm hot, as his missile launched. And then instead of getting an A for abort, and during practice missions, when you got too close to the plane you were targeting, you got a snow screen effect as the radar picked up all the pieces of the plane that had just been shot out of the air. Oh, boy. And when the smoke settled, all the blame fell on the sergeant who had reported that the hot planes had been recycled. So that was a tragedy. Mm. And I was in there during peacetime, 56 to 60, in between Korea and Vietnam. Mm-hmm. I never got shot at. I did get a loaded 12-gauge shotgun poked at me one time. It was April, I believe it was, and the snow was starting to melt around the runway, and it was evening, and we were sitting around, and the guy came in and said that night crawlers, or fishing worms, are crawling onto the edge of the runway where it's warm. And so next thing you know, a bunch of us with flashlights and coffee cans are on hands and knees following the edge of the runway picking up worms. And following the edge of the runway, with our noses down, we didn't exactly notice where we were. And I got over near where the planes that were armed were. And next thing you know, this MP is sticking me with a 12-gauge shotgun. I'm in the wrong place. And me and my buddy, so he took us to his security officer, who fortunately was a fisherman, and he turned us loose. But a shotgun, when you look at the business end, it's a pretty lethal-looking thing.
Oh, yes.
When I got my discharge, I had I had been working first in the flight line, and then I'd been working special services, and the special services major, he talked the General O'Neill into giving me a re-enlistment talk. So I was struggling to muster out, got this order to report to this general, so I cleaned up, went to see the general, and he said that the major had wanted me to re-enlist, and he'd assign me to special services and get me promoted. And I'd been in 4 years and was still at E3, and he could fix that. He said, but truthfully, with your radar training, you shouldn't be in special services. You should be working for me in radar. And your brother's in radar over in Barcelona. I could station you with him if you'll re-enlist. And I said, well, General, I was planning on getting out and going to college. He said, oh, we'll do that. And how's the fishing? But when the general and sometimes big shots like the J. Edgar Hoover's right time guy would come up to our recreation camp, many times, rather than pay $20 for a real fishing guide, they would call the major and tell him to turn me loose to be their fishing guide for the day. And so I'd go into town the night before and buy some beer for the real fishing guides, pump them for information. They were always very cooperative. And then I'd take the guys out fishing. And first I tried where I thought might work. System, if that didn't work, then I'd switch to what the fishing guides would come up with. So, you can't say I had rough duty.
So once you were discharged, you went on to college and became a teacher?
Yes. What happened was North American had promised me and a couple of buddies of mine a job in electronics in California. And so in August or September 1st, 1960, I headed out to California and got there in time for what they call the Eisenhower recession. The plant I was going to be assigned to hadn't even built. So North American offered me a job, a glorified assembly line job, soldering electrical boards, and I couldn't do that. So carpenter's union, my dad was a carpenter. During summers I worked as a carpenter. While I was in high school, I worked a couple of weeks as a carpenter, and then I tried selling Fords on commission. And then my sister came back to Southern Illinois University, where she had started in September. This was January, or late December, and said, buddies of mine were going to college on a GI Bill. I said, no, there's no GI Bill for us. She insisted, so I called one of them and found that the state of Illinois had a military scholarship that if you were an honorably discharged veteran from Illinois, could get any state college to accept you. They would pay tuition only for 4 years. And so, since my grades in high school weren't good enough for a September entrance, but they would take me in January as long as I maintained a C average. So with $150 and a beat-up 51 Hudson and my discharge paper, I left California and went to Illinois to go to college. And I worked after the first year I worked as a warehouse mechanic and then as a lifeguard, and then after that I worked as a photographer for the university for 4 years. Got a Bachelor's of Science in Speech Education, teaching certificate, a minor in Recreation Outdoor Education, and almost a minor in photography. I was one course short. I was doing so much photography, both for the university for salary and then for myself, that I didn't bother to take that course because I didn't need it. I didn't need another minor. And so I transitioned directly from undergraduate to graduate school. And then I got so many job offers that I took one and went to Seneca Falls, New York, to be a recreation director there. That's where I met my wife from Pennsylvania. And 2 years later, we moved to Pennsylvania. But so the Air Force was pretty good to me.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
And a lot of adventures. And I hope this is useful to somebody.
But definitely, you had some very interesting insights and adventures.
Well, I'll tell you one more. They came along one day and decided that the enlisted men could not keep their hunting rifles in their cars or in their barracks. They had to check them into supply. Well, supply only works certain hours. If you wanted to go hunting, you had to get up earlier. So I convinced the company clerk to not give me a roommate, and I bought a combination lock for his empty locker, and first thing you know, 5 or 6 of us had all our hunting guns in my room in this one locker. Well, Castro attacked Batista, and we were on full alert, like we lived in tents on the flight line next to our planes, and we were keeping almost 99% planes in commission. And as it ended, we had several meetings, and at one of those, this captain who had been in the Air Force in Korea when their base got overrun was briefing us, and he was serious and we weren't. And he comes on and he says to the guy, well, points to a guy and says, what would you do if the Cubans, paratrooper Rangers came down on this base and attacked? Where would you go? And I think what he wanted him to say was go to the Army and check out a weapon. He said, I'd go to Bertram's room. I can get a rifle there with no red tape. I tell him, be quiet, quiet. We certainly had many good adventures, and then when I got to college, they gave me something like 12 hours credit in electronics for my radar school that applied to intellectuals. That was good. I think we're closing in on that 45 minutes you said was what you preferred.
Yeah, I mean, we can go over that if there's anything else you'd like to add.
Well, I probably could. I got to stop and think about it. Oh yeah, in Denver I bought a 52 Plymouth, and so my paycheck after deduction was $52, and my car payments was $49. And so I every 9 weeks or so I used to go to Fitzsimmons Army Hospital and sell them a pint of blood for $10.
Oh boy.
And I always had low blood pressure, so it always took them a while. But one day I had just done that, and I was in their waiting room with the required wait before they would give you your pay. And this young WAP came in, and she had just given blood. And she got up to get a magazine or something, and I saw her knees start to fold, so I jumped up and caught her just before she hit the floor, and then I fainted.
Oh my God.
2 of us crashed down on the floor, and we both woke up on Guernseys with all the hospital staff standing around laughing. And the head doctor came in and says, is this the guy with low blood pressure took so long to fill the bottle? Yeah. So he took both of our pay chips and changed them, so we each had to wait 3 hours before we could get our money. And so then when I got back to the waiting room, this young girl that I kept from her face hitting the floor, she was mad at me because we had to wait that 3 hours. So I didn't score any points on that.
Oh boy.
Yeah. But now, I've taken things like that and used them in my book, Chipped Beef on Toast. And chippedbeefontoast.sos is all over the internet for sale in bookstores around the world or internet book dealers. And it's 26 short stories based on my military experiences and interviews with veterans. What I found is veterans don't want to talk about blood and guts and combat, but they're happy to talk about the guy who dropped his rifle during inspection on the general's foot or goofy things that happened. Like a young guy that was an Eagle Scout. The first time he saluted an officer, he was so nervous he used a Boy Scout salute. And so they really busted him about that, but he became part of one of my stories. And once a month I go to the Veterans Nursing Home in Daytona Beach here and read stories to the guys. And some of them are my own, others I picked up from veterans and such. So I'm always glad to do that. They're a captive audience. They're a good bunch.
Yes, I'm sure.
I appreciate it. But I was always an Irish storyteller, and it wasn't until I retired in 2001, I moved to Florida to write. I really started writing. Now I've done 4 books, and I'm working on a 5th. 4 of them that are published.
Okay.
I'm working on a memoir biography called Blarney and Cheese on Rye, R-Y, that deals with my life and times. When I was 8 years old in East St. Louis in 1944, and we ran around with sticks shooting Japs and Germans, but not Italians. We had too many Italian kids on our block. We were not in war with Italy. Anyway, the boys talked me into climbing to the very top of a pear tree to see if our German neighbor had a secret radio antenna on his roof. And I fell out of the tree. and broke a rose trellis, knocked the wind out of me, so they ran across and told my mother I was dead. And so that was my contribution to World War II. My sister wanted to make a Purple Heart to put in the window, but Mother said the block would make her take it down.
Yeah.
But we had a lot of experiences there. And basic training, though, was actually the basic training was in 2 phases. If you were going to a tech school like I did, you did the first 4 weeks at Lackland, and then you did about 8 or 9 weeks part-time while doing your training school. Mm-hmm. And guys that went to be food service or MPs, they went to another part of the base after the 4 weeks and did like 6 weeks intense basic, and then they got their stripes. And if it was MP, then they went to MP school, or food service school, or on-the-job training. But where we shipped out and went to Denver right away. So my basic training was just barely 30 days. And then after that was part-time.
It's interesting that they did that.
Yeah. Way. Yeah. I think they've changed a lot since then.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
And so I know the pay's changed considerably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for your story.
Well, thank you very much. Hey, now listen. I could give you a name and phone number of somebody who would really be a good interview.
Okay. Hold on. Let me just turn off the machine here.